What's up, you guys? We're talking UFC Vegas 102. Now, this is a smaller fight card. There's not a lot of big narratives behind these fights. You should note in the main event and co-main event bouts, you have two crafty veterans that are fighting with their backs up against the wall. All right, they're desperately looking to hold on to their rankings. You take a look at Jared Cannonier, who's taking out Gregory Rodrigues. Rodrigues is a fighter that's creeping into his prime. He's just 32 years old, even though he looks like he's 40 years old. Jared Cannonier, if he loses this fight, he'll be in a 3-fight losing skid. And although even in some of his recent losses, he still looked pretty good, especially for a 40-year-old fighter. You have to see the writing on the wall that he eventually will look to hang the gloves up, or we'll see how his career tails off. In the co-main event fight, we have Cavalcanti taking on Youssef Zalal. That fight's very interesting to me. Kattar, if he loses this fight, would have lost 5 of his last 6. Zalal, on the other hand, comes into this fight with a lot of momentum. He comes into it on a 6-fight winning streak. Remember, he was once cut by the UFC. This is his second stint in the octagon. Okay, but he started off that first stint at just 23 years old, and he actually had some impressive victories. He took his fair share of losses. I mean, understand he was fighting fighters like the current champion Ilia Topuria. Sean Woodson is a talented fighter too. He went to a split decision with him. So some hiccups that he had in that first stint. He was so young. He went to the regional scene, got a lot more experience. He's a very talented fighter representing Factory X. And then throughout the rest of the card, you have a lot of young Brazilian talent. We have both the Bonfim brothers throwing down. That'll be interesting. Two promising fighters. They always deliver from an entertainment standpoint at the very least. So we'll see if they can continue their winning ways. If you're new here, please just take a second to subscribe to the channel. I promise to keep delivering quality content to you guys. And if you could all just smash that like button, it means a lot to me. Go follow me on all my social media. You'll see that popping up periodically. It's listed here on the channel. And if anybody wants my exclusive targets, the bets that I'm targeting for this card, you can shoot me an email at mmafortuneteller@gmail.com or shoot me a DM on IG or Twitter, specifically IG there at mmafortuneteller. All right, guys, let's jump into the video.
The teller.
Let's kick this one off with the good one. In the welterweight division, we have Gabriel Bonfim taking on Khaos Williams. Now, Gabriel is the younger of the Bonfim brothers, and I've been on record saying that I feel he's the more promising of the two. I've since kind of retracted that statement. I really don't know who is going to have the more promising UFC career. I mean, I have them about dead even right now. We've seen both of them make recent mistakes inside the UFC. They're both young fighters, and they're learning, but the talent is real. The thing I like about Gabriel is he brings in real size to this division, and he is a nasty submission artist. Okay, he will pull off all types of subs off on you. He's very aggressive. We haven't seen his striking translate into a lot of knockouts in the cage thus far, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's a bad striker. We have seen him hurt people on the feet and use that damage that he inflicted to eventually set up a sub. And when you watch his tape, he's decently technical. He's a great athlete, and I wouldn't be surprised over time if we start to see him land some KOs. But without a doubt, the elephant in the room was that performance that he had against Nicholas Dalby. At the time, he was just 26 years old. It was a great learning experience for him. And if you guys rewatch that fight, it wasn't like he was completely outclassed, okay? He was winning the beginning portion of that fight, and it was one of those types of fights where a typical Dalby type performance, where Dalby has great cardio, he's extremely tough, and if you think you're just going to go in there and walk through him, you're sadly mistaken, okay? And the youngster learned there, and you had to love the bounce back fight that he had against Angel Lusa, where he really outclassed Lusa, right? He won that fight 30-27, hit the unanimous decision there. He outstruck him 106-60. And the main thing you had to like with that fight is the fact that it went to a decision. He needs more cage time. All right. You take a look at a lot of the earlier fights he's had in his career. Although he has 17 pro fights, a lot of them have ended early. Okay. He goes in there, he finishes dudes early. We saw it on Dana White's Contender Series. He needs to get more cage time so he feels comfortable in the later rounds. Because when it comes to Khaos, you're talking about one of the more under the radar fighters in the UFC. First off, I thought he defeated Randy Brown. Okay, so he should be coming into this fight on a 5-fight winning streak. His only loss in the octagon was against Michel Pereira, who we all know is an extreme talent. Okay, so there's no real shame in that loss. and dating back to even before he joined the UFC. I mean, he just keeps going out there and getting victories. All right. He's an unorthodox type of striker, but he carries some serious power. He can knock you out. And I do worry a little bit if Bonfim plays that game for as long as the fight lasts. But, if he plays that game late into this fight, if there's a lot of time taking place there is potential that Khaos can hurt Bonfim there. All right. We saw Bonfim finish by Dalvi in that second round. Khaos is a fighter that has knocked out 8 of the 15 men that he has stepped in there with. And we've seen him knock out respectable names in the game. So he is live for the knockout. You also take note that even though Bonfim has this great frame, he's so tall for the division, it's actually Khaos that has the 4-inch reach advantage. He has a crazy wingspan, and he's deceptive with his distance, right? Guys, they think they're out of range, man, and he'll launch in and he'll crack you. So I do have Khaos live to land a KO, and if this fight goes to a decision, Khaos is also live to win a decision. But at the end of the day, I am going to side with Gabriel to get his hand raised. I know Khaos has never been subbed before, but Bonfim is a different type of threat there compared to anything that Khaos has ever faced before. Gabriel can pull off all kinds of subs. If things get crazy, do not be surprised if you see an early sub. We could also potentially see Gabriel land a knockout that's not out of the realm. Like I said, the striking is going to continue to develop, but he could also sneak off a decision. This is a very close fight, but I'm going to say the youngster at just 27 takes a massive leap up and gets the biggest victory of his career against Khaos Williams. Now we take a look at the odds for this fight. I think some of you guys know where I'm going with this. I am not in agreement with Gabriel being a minus 220 favorite in this spot here. I think that line's too high. The value is on Khaos, which you can grab right around a plus 180. Now, if you guys like that value on the Khaos line and you want to go lock it in, make sure you reach out to me so I can get you my referral link to BetUS. A special shout out to my partners over there. You sign up to BetUS, you're going to get a 150% match on your first 3 deposits. You'll have some money to play around with, and then you can go lock in on that Khaos line, or maybe not. Maybe pump the brakes, and maybe we'll find some better spots moving throughout the card as far as value goes. But one thing you don't want to hesitate on is reaching out to me. Okay, guys, shoot me an email, DM me on Instagram or Twitter. I'll get you that link, and we'll get the ball rolling into this card. In the strawweight division, we have Angela Hill taking on Ketlen Souza. Ketlen Souza comes in hot off a big-time upset performance over the once. I say once because, I don't know, I think people are going to start pumping the brakes on the Jaregi hype, right? Yasmin Jaregi, once thought of as one of the top prospects coming up in all of women's mixed martial arts, but that's 2 times now that she's made blatant mistakes and it's been finished up early. Okay, you got to give some respect to Ketlen for getting the finish there. Before that, she did take Marnik Mann to a decision. I think you guys know how I feel about Marnik Mann. That's not a real test. Before that, she had that UFC debut performance where she made that early mistake against Kadini Silva and was caught in a knee bar. Okay, that fight only lasted about 2 minutes. And that fight did take place in the flyweight division, which she was coming into the UFC as the former or the current Invicta flyweight champion. Okay, she was the champion over there. After that loss in her last 2 fights, she dropped down to the strawweight division, which is where this fight's taking place. So even though some of us look at her as kind of an undersized fighter, if you guys have been following her from her past fights, I mean, she's not a small fighter in this division, and she essentially has the same frame as Angela Hill has here. She's at a 1-inch reach disadvantage, but both fighters essentially the same height. There's really not a lot going on there. The thing that I like for Angela Hill here is I think that if she keeps this fight standing, she should be able to outpoint Souza on the feet. She's always shown to be very good at those types of tactics. And even though she's 40 years old, I mean, she's coming off of a loss to Tabitha Ritchie. A lot of us have respect for the skill set of Tabitha Ritchie. She's a more proven fighter than a Ketlen Souza. And that was a fight that played out somewhat close, right? I mean, you take a look at the total strikes. Angela Hill landing 140, Ritchie landing 140. One issue for Hill in that fight, which we've seen from her at times, was she was taken down and she was controlled. She was controlled for about an entire round in that fight. I don't know if Ketlen's going to be able to hold her down for that much time. And I think that as this fight takes place in the feet, I think Angela Hill should be able to outpoint her. Like I said, Angela Hill, 40 years old, but look at the past performances. Before that fight against Ritchie, which was competitive, she had victories over Denise Gomes and Luana Pinero, 2 respectable names. And these fights have all taken place recently, Okay, so she's still putting off those types of performances as of recently. She is as dedicated and as motivated as a fighter you'll see in the fight game. I mean, you have to give her that credit. At 40 years old, and you see her just constantly putting in work. We saw a recent interview with her, and she's just all about business, man. And I think she's hungry to bounce back with the victory here, and I wouldn't be surprised if she does it there. And you take a look at the numbers. I mean, landing 5.46 strikes per minute. She's consistently put off that type of volume in the cage, and that should lead her to out-volume Ketlen and get a decision victory here. That's how I see this fight going. Taking a look at the odds, we see that Vegas has this as a close fight. All right, Angela Hill is just a -140 favorite. The comeback on Souza is +110. You have to wonder, are the masses putting a little bit too much stock into that Souza victory? How would that fight against Jared play out if they fought 100 times? And I don't want to say, did she get lucky? I don't like to use that word luck when it comes to fights, but if you guys understanding what I'm saying, is there a little bit too much stock going into that last fight? Angela Hill is just a constant proven fighter, win or lose. Okay, even in her losses, they play out very closely. She has so many losses that come by way of split decision against some of the highest talent in the game. I like the value on Angela Hill at -140. At 155, we have Jared Flash Gordon taking on Kauê Fernandes, the Nova União product, who comes in off his first UFC victory. He went out there, he knocked out Muhammad Yahya. Okay, and he's been known to go out there and knock out the opposition, but we have to note, we haven't seen him go out there and take out a high-level fighter. Muhammad Yahya, he's a fighter that I believe kind of was given a UFC opportunity based off maybe some people that he knows. I don't know. I mean, I just never really seen Muhammad Yahya on that level to be getting the amount of opportunities he's had in the octagon. And by amount of opportunities, I'm talking just one or two. And I think that's how many times he's fought in the UFC. But we saw Yahya, just to point it out, I mean, we saw Yahya lose in both fights in the UFC. He also lost to Trevor Peek. Okay, so I'm not super sold on Fernandes based off him getting that first round finish. The fight before that against Mark Diakase, there's a little bit of an issue here. Okay, he was controlled for almost 9 minutes in that fight, and we've seen Diakase go out and use those kind of tactics before, which has led him to, I believe, he's cut by the UFC these days. I don't think he's fighting under the UFC banner. I mean, he's such a boring fighter, which is so crazy because Diakase had so much talent. He was thought to be one of the top prospects way back in the day, and he was going in there knocking dudes out, and then all of a sudden, every time he was in there, all he would look to do is wrestle. But the point I'm making is that he's not a bad grappler, but he still shouldn't be controlling you for 8 minutes and 38 seconds. So that's a little alarming, especially when you take into consideration that Gordon has solid wrestling. He can change levels on you. His striking isn't bad either. Remember, a lot of us, essentially the masses, the majority had Jared Gordon recently going out there and defeating Paddy Pimblett, which love him or hate him, Pimblett keeps going out there and getting his hand raised. So, I mean, Pimblett's not a bad fighter. The Bobby Green fight, we didn't really get to see that fight play out. If you guys remember, there was a headbutt. I believe the headbutt ended that fight early. Then he follows that up with a knockout over Mark Madsen. And even though he lost his last fight to Nasrat Hakparast, who's a pretty high-level fighter, that fight went to a split decision. Okay, I have Nasrat as a step ahead of Fernandes, clearly, at this point in time. And although Gordon's 36 years old, there's no real signs of him taking a steep decline, right? Like, he's not just going to fall off the mountain here. This is a fighter that's very dedicated to the fight game. You guys know his history. He's battled with addiction. And if you've ever been around those types of people, especially the ones that really change themselves, they use that same type of addictive personality very well into other aspects of life, right? Into the fight game, for example, in Gordon's case. I mean, they're addicted to training and fighting. And I expect Gordon to still be a fighter that has crazy cardio, pushes the pace, and I think he could change levels here and use his wrestling to get the better of Fernandes. Now, I don't say it with an overwhelming amount of confidence. We're going to get to the odds here in a second, but Fernandes has shown some signs of being a dangerous striker. Out of his 9 victories, 5 of them have come by way of KO. Okay, we see that he's dangerous there. He's a solid athlete. He carries some serious pop, and he's well-rounded with his striking. It's not out of the realm that he could land a big strike here and knock Gordon out, which we've seen Gordon knocked out throughout his career. Okay, I mean, you take a look at his 7 losses, 4 of them have come by way of KO. And I just want to highlight a couple real quick, and then we'll get to the odds. But, I mean, he was knocked out Was submitted by Grant Dawson. He was knocked out by Charles Oliveira. That's a high-level fighter there. Was knocked out against Joaquim Silva. He ran into a buzzsaw there against Diego Ferreira. Okay, so, I mean, there was a stint where he was knocked out in 3 or 4 fights, and that was when he was a younger fighter. So if you don't think that he could run into something here and be KO'd, you're sadly mistaken. So be a little careful there. He's the more well-rounded fighter. I was close to siding with Fernandes here. And as I take a look at the odds, Fernandes is around a plus 145. It's a little dangerous because he's not proven, but I think the value's on him. I'm not really willing to chalk up minus 175 on Gordon. I'm just not at the age that he's at. It's a little too high for my liking. I would like him more around a minus 150 or so. And I'm not sure if you're going to be able to get that. We'll see. But the value's on the dog. But I will say that Gordon wins this fight using his wrestling, changing levels, using his wrestling, and having a substantial amount of ground control time. Down at the flies, we have two 28-year-olds set to square off as we have another Nova União product in Rafael Estevam. He's taking on Jesus Aguilar. Aguilar has a nasty guillotine. Okay, it's creeping up on that Tellertine type status. Some Cody McKenzie vibes going on for all you young bucks out there that refer to me as Unk. Go look up Cody McKenzie. Go check out his Tapology and see what he was doing with the guillotine. Another fighter that tried to replicate a lot of what the Teller used to do in his heyday. Now, you know what's interesting about Aguilar, man? He actually suffers from T-Rex syndrome, which is something you don't really see correlated to fighters that have really good guillotines. You know, on a serious note, when you have longer arms, it gives you a lot more leverage. Those long, slender arms do help you pull off guillotines. I would know about that, but somehow he just keeps pulling them off. You take a look at his 11 victories, 7 of them have come by way of sub, and almost all of them are by guillotine. I think 5 or 6 of them have come by way of guillotine. And there's no question the biggest of them all was the one that he pulled off in that last fight against Stuart Nickel, where he was quite the underdog. And Stuart Nickel is a very promising fighter. He'll bounce back from that. I don't know what he was thinking, sticking his head in there. But also, you know, the guillotine that he pulled off on DWCS that led him to getting the contract. He kicked his UFC career off with the loss to Tatsuro Taira. That's an interesting fight to look at because although he has a good guillotine, his overall BJJ, as we saw in that fight, it could be exploited at times, especially when you're talking about a fighter like Rafael Estevam, who is very high level there. We saw what he just recently did to Charles Johnson, controlling him in that fight for almost 2 rounds straight. He controlled him for 9 minutes and 23 seconds. He's very tactical. He has a more well-rounded BJJ arsenal. So as long as he doesn't make a mistake and get caught with the guillotine, I definitely see Estevam controlling and being a step ahead down in the mat. And also, that guillotine could be a little bit of an issue for Aguilar. If he looks to fish for that too much, we may see that leading him to falling on his back and Estevam getting that control time with ease. And I could just see him avoiding that sub and just spending a lot of time on top down in the mat. That's actually how I see this fight taking place. I think Estevam uses his BJJ to control this fight. Now, on the feet, Aguilar has that one big knockout. But I mean, you take a look at who it was against. It was against Shannon Ross, who is just around that time was just getting knocked out against everyone that he stepped in there with. So we'll give him a little bit of credit for going in there and getting the knockout in just 17 seconds, which we did call. But you understand that Estevam is not Shannon Ross. He's a very tactical fighter. He has his youth going for him. He's much more durable, and he'll probably be out of range. And look, Aguilar has just that one KO. That's the only knockout out of all 13 of his fights. I don't think that Estevam will run into any real trouble there. And actually, on the feet, he'll be the more technical fighter. I think he'll be a step ahead of Aguilar. I will say this, and let me also note, Estevam will have a 4-inch reach advantage too. We talked about the T-Rex syndrome that Aguilar suffers from, so Estevam can kind of fight tactically from the outside there. But Aguilar, one thing he does have going for himself, I want to give him credit here, he has a little bit of an X factor. He has this type of unorthodox type of strength. You see him pull off some maneuvers at times that aren't even the most technical, but he makes them work. He'll pick dudes up and he'll slam them down. We talked about the guillotine, and he has this type of grip and strength that he uses at times. I just don't think that he'll be able to get away with that against the tactician in Estevam, and I think Estevam gets the job done. I'm going to say, it's possible Estevam gets to his back and pulls off a rear naked choke. Could also go to a decision. No matter how you spin it, I like Estevam to win this fight. If you guys want me to give you a pick, I know you guys do. I'm going to say that it goes to a decision. I'm going to say unanimous decision for Estevam, and we take a look at the odds. The Estevam is a big favorite. Okay, he's right around a minus 350 right now. The comeback on Aguilar is around plus 270. I mean, I'm almost hesitant to even say the values on the dog there because I feel pretty confident in Estevam, and I like backing fighters that fight safely and tactically. They don't put themselves at risk too much. And I don't think Aguilar, the guillotine is a little dangerous, but Estevam has the defense to avoid that. So he's not going to be at that much risk. I like Estevam to hit that unanimous decision victory. In the heavyweight division, we have the brother of the famously loved Johnny Walker, Valter Walker. He's taking on Don'Tale Mayes, which if you guys didn't realize, Don'Tale Mayes is ranked, okay? He's ranked 14th in the heavyweight division. That just happened recently. And Don'Tale Mayes, a long-time Jackson Wink product. We know that he's gotten a lot of work with John Jones. He famously was training with Jones when Jones injured himself, which prevented him from that initial matchup with Stipe Miocic. And that's always a good thing when you're training with a GOAT like John Jones. But interestingly enough, even though he gets in that type of work, one major issue that I have with Mayes is his grappling, his wrestling. You could say his takedown defense, but specifically his get-up game. When he's taken down, he has a very hard time getting up. If you take a look at all three of his recent losses, which came against Shamil Gaziev, Rodrigo Nascimento, and Augusto Sakai, in all three of those fights, he was only taken down one or two times, okay? But once he was taken down, he was held down for rounds at a time. And that's very frustrating when you're backing a fighter that can't get up. Even in the Hamdi Abdel Wahab fight, that was a fight that played out very closely, but he was taken down numerous times in that fight, which was a loss, even though it was overturned due to the failed drug test. So that's an issue here because we know that Valter Walker looks to use those types of tactics. We saw him just get his first ever UFC victory by taking down Junior Tafa and subbing him in the first round. Now, you could say we've seen some growth from Mayes' grappling in the sense that he hasn't been subbed when he's taken down to the mat, which is important. So if he's taken down, we've seen him defend those types of submissions better. You take a look at the Nascimento rematch, right? They fought initially right when he kicked his UFC career off, and he was caught in a rear naked choke in the second round there. And that was after losing his UFC debut, which he got caught in a heel hook from Cyril Gahn. But since those two losses, he's not getting subbed, which is somewhat of a good sign. But even if he avoids the sub from Valter here, I have an issue with his get-up game, and I'm just not willing to back him in this spot. Valter is just 27 years old, even though he looks like he's an older man. He's a very young fighter, so we should see some growth from him. Yes, the fight against Brzeski in his UFC debut is alarming. That was a fight that he had a good amount of takedowns and control time, but wasn't able to do any type of damage. And when the fight was standing, we did see him getting picked apart and out-volumed, right? He was outstruck 135-56, even though he had 7 minutes and 19 seconds of control time, and he still lost that fight. So we could potentially see something play out similarly to that, where he gets his takedowns, but if he's not really inflicting damage, and if he starts to slow down and Mayes lands some damaging strikes, he could snag rounds like that. Okay, so that is not out of the realm. We can see that type of fight play out. But at the end of the day, I still have to side with Valter here. I do. I just think he's coming in with the momentum. I think that he'll start to grow more as a fighter. And I'm not willing to sit here and be frustrated as I see Mayes on his back for the majority of that fight, and we see him lose a unanimous decision, which is what I see happening here. I'm going to say Walker wins via unanimous decision. I don't think he finds the sub. Now we take a look at the odds for this fight, which we'll see Valter Walker is right around a -170. The comeback on Mayes is at +135. I think there's a good argument. The value is on Mayes, but I'm just so worried about him being a turtle on his back that if I have to pick, I think I'll still go with the value on Valter at a -170 line. I mean, I think the line is very accurate. Let me say that. I think it's a very accurate line. In this past season of Dana White's Contender Series, I would say the Elijah Smith signing was one of the more exciting signings that we've seen from the show. And it's not because we cashed a huge official play, and right around the time we cashed that play was when we really started to get the ball rolling. We were on like a 3 or 4 month heater, which now has led to about a 9-month heater. It had nothing to do with that. What got me so excited about the signing was the fact that this kid is so young and talented. I used to watch his dad fight, Gilbert Smith, right? Gilbert Smith was on The Ultimate Fighter. He was a former UFC fighter. And I just love seeing those second generation athletes work their way into whatever major sport they're going into, right? I'm not even talking about just in the MMA world. I love seeing it in the MLB, in the NBA, in the NFL. Okay, I think that it's one of the best leg ups you could have as an athlete, having a father that already did what they did at the highest of levels, okay? And fighting in the UFC, although Gilbert Smith didn't have a world of success, I mean, fighting in the UFC is as high as it gets. And then Elijah gets all those learning experiences that his father had passed down to him. Okay, he's been training since he was just a young kid. So even though he's a young buck and he's just 22 years old, all right, he's already had years of training and fighting. Okay, he has 8 professional fights. He has a wrestling background. He has nasty boxing skills. He's a very well-rounded fighter. And then you take a look at Vince Morales, who also came into the UFC from fighting through the Dana White's Contender Series show, even though he actually took a loss. If you guys remember, he was subbed by Domingo Pilarte way back in 2018. His career has been all over the place. He's fought under the Bellator banner. He had an initial stint in the UFC when they took him on, and he faced off with Song Yadong in his UFC debut, took his fair share of L's, got released from the UFC, and then he was re-signed. But the one thing you note is there's been a lot of losses going on. Okay, he has his occasional wins. He's a tough fighter, but there's a lot of losses going on, and that dates us all the way back to his second opportunity in the UFC, which he lost to Taylor Lapilus. And you could take some things away from that Lapilus fight. Lapilus did have success using his grappling and his wrestling. I do believe that Elijah Smith can kind of replicate that, but standing, I also have Elijah Smith as the much more technical and dangerous striker. But even though that's the case, Smith has to be careful if he gets caught up in a war and a slug fest type of affair, because Morales, he has 7 KOs out of his 16 victories. He does carry some pop. He's a scrappy dude. And we've seen Smith finish before on the feet. If you guys remember, he lost to Reyes Cortez back in 2023 over in the Fury FC. Reyes Cortez, the brother of Tracy Cortez, an underrated tough fighter. That was a fight where there was a high pace to it. Okay, it was a war, and eventually we did see Elijah Smith break down, but it was really a learning experience for the young kid, and we've seen how much better he's looked throughout the years, dating back to that last fight where he got the contract, where he took out Aaron Tao, and that fight was a war. And you noticed in that fight, when things were getting hot, when things were heating up, he was much more calm, cool, and collected, and he was making better decisions. But we have seen him touched up a little bit because he welcomes those types of fights at times. So that's just what I want to note, that he has to be careful. If he fights a tactical fight here and slows the pace of this fight down, he is the much better athlete. He's the better fighter already at 22. I'm not even worried about all the experience that Vince Morales has. I'm just more worried that Elijah gets caught up trying to put on a show. And even if he goes out there and looks to put on a show, there's a realistic possibility that he could have his own success finishing the fight. Okay, but I am going to side with Elijah Smith. I really like what I've seen from this kid, and I'm going to say that he wins a unanimous decision, while it's also live that he gets a knockout or a sub. I mean, he could change levels. He could do a little bit of it all. So, and you're going to see a fighter like him rapidly improve. Okay, so he's going to look much better than he just did even four months ago. Okay, at 22. I mean, you're going to see rapid growth from this kid. Right now, he is a minus 230 favorite. Okay, so you see Vegas putting that respect on this young buck's name, and I think it's warranted. Got to caution yourself a little bit, because it's not a low line. I mean, it's a decently high line. You got to caution yourself a little bit, as he is fighting a crafty veteran. Which way am I going to go with as far as is the value on him, the minus 230 line, or is the value on Vince Morales? This is another fight where I think that the line is very accurate. It's hard for me to say, but the fact that I'm saying this is an accurate line, you're seeing him coming in his UFC debut as a minus 230 favorite, really shows you how I think of this kid. We got a fight taking place in the very rare women's bantamweight division. It's such a rare division that take a look. Both these women have numbers next to their names, and it's odd in two senses, right? Cavalcanti, she's a very promising fighter, but she doesn't have a long history of success in the UFC just yet. Her career is just starting to kick off, and she's already ranked 13th. On the other hand, you have Julia Avila, who's ranked 12th. She's had 2 fights in the last 4 years. She's 1-1. She recently lost to Misha Tate, a very old Misha Tate, and she's still ranked in the top 15. I mean, you guys know I'm always throwing some shade at this division. It's not that I don't like it. I just wish there was more fighters that were able to bless us with their talents in this division. We don't see it, man. Now, once upon a time, Avila was looked at as a fighter that had real potential in this division. I mean, you take a look as she kicked off her UFC career coming in from the Invicta scene. She started it off 2-0. She took out Penny Kianzad and Gina Mazzani. Looking at those two victories now, they don't really look that impressive. And then she ended up losing to Sajara Eubanks. Eubanks used to be a staple of this division, kind of the teller's still throwing shade at this division. If you guys catch on to what I'm saying there, I mean, Eubanks, tough chick, but I don't know. I don't know. After that loss, she did bounce back with the third round submission where she caught Julia Storlienko in a rear naked choke in the third round. And Storlienko is actually a fighter that's known for her grappling. That was Avila's kind of return fight. I think she may have had a child or something. Something kept her out of the octagon for a long time. And that victory led her to the recent third round rear naked choke loss against Misha Tate. And I mean, listen, she looks like Beneil Dariush with the wig. I mean, that's what's going on here. She's 36. And I definitely am on the younger fighter here who's really showing some promise with her striking. All right, Cavalcanti, this chick's talented. This is what we want to see more of. We want to see more young talent coming into this division and getting numbers next to their name. So I have no issue with the fact that she's ranked 13th after just 3 victories. I have no issue with that, even though she hasn't found a finish in any of them. She's looked good with her striking. She went out there and defeated Jacqueline Nunez, an underrated fighter. She just defeated Nora Cornol, who's a talented striker. She outstruck her. So this is how I see the fight taking place. I think Cavalcanti is going to be able to keep this fight standing where she is the better athlete, better striker. She'll out-volume Avila, and I'll say she wins another unanimous decision. We'll take a look at the odds where we will see that Cavalcanti is as high as a minus 410. She's right around a minus 390, right? So she's about a 4-1 favorite here. And I think that even as high as that line is, it's really not that steep because there's just a great chance she goes out there and gets her hand raised. I don't see her getting subbed here. The takedown defense, the grappling skills are getting better and better. And I have major question marks and concerns about Avila's age and stiffness and really where her mind's at as well. I think that we see her lose this fight and probably never see her fight in the UFC again or even fight in MMA in general at all. Stylistically, this should really play out to be a fun fight. We have the black belt hunter, Rodolfo Vieira, one of the more decorated Brazilian jiu-jitsu players we've ever seen come into the UFC. He's taken on Andre Petroski, a fighter that really has a respectable grappling resume. We've seen him very active in the grappling world. He just had a match against Pat Downey, and he stays active over there. And he came into the UFC through the Ultimate Fighter. He's had some ups and downs. And the thing that stands out to me with this fight is I like the matchup because stylistically, I think it's going to play out to be a fun fight. And that's what Petroski needs right now because in some of his more recent fights, like the Josh Fremd and the Dylan Bucka fight, he was able to go out there and kind of outclass them using his wrestling and grappling, and he was able to control them. And I don't see this fight playing out like that. Vieira is going to be very hard to hold down, and Vieira also pushes the pace, and even on the feet, he'll look to land on you. And I think there's going to be a high pace to this fight. This could be one of those fights where you see two grappling-based fighters end up involving themselves in a stand-up war. Because both fighters may be hard to take down, and it could play out like that. We've seen a lot of these types of matchups play out like that. And, Vieira has shown real growth with his striking. I mean, you take a look at the Chris Curtis fight. That was a fight where I had an official play in Curtis. I was very happy to cash, but I was on the edge of my seat throughout that fight. And it wasn't just that Vieira was displaying his BJJ. It was the striking that he was showing off in that fight that kept it close. I mean, you take a look at all the victories he's had as of recently, definitely when he's having his real success, it's when he's going out there and pulling off the sub. You take a look at the Petrosian fight, the Cody Brundage fight, the Dustin Stoltzfus fight. Now, I would argue to you that all of those fighters are kind of lower level or tailor-made matchups for him, right? Petrosian has good striking, but he has no grappling, and he was able to go out there and sub him. Brundage, a very up-and-down fighter. Some of you guys would look at him as a low-level fighter, and I just would highlight this Anthony Hernandez fight. When you saw him faced off against a fighter that's very well-rounded, who could hold his own with the grappling and just a real mixed martial artist, we saw Vieira breathing heavily, and eventually he gassed out in that fight, and Hernandez finished him up via sub. That's something that we may see take place here. I think that if this is a fight, like I think that it will be, that it'll be one with a very high pace to it. We could see Vieira breathing heavily and slow down a bit, which I will say he's shown some development there, but I still think that's a possibility. Petroski comes in great shape, and Petroski has underrated power in his hands, and I just think that this is going to be a war, and I'm siding with my boy here. Petroski is a fighter that always shows love to me in IG, and if you guys haven't heard, a lot of these big-time fighters are starting to follow the teller, man. Got that blue verification. Go follow me at MMA Fortune Teller. Dricus Duplessis just gave me a follow over on IG recently. But it's not just that Petroski follows me and shows love. I mean, seriously here, I think that he could win this fight, and I like the value on him because he is an underdog. I want to see him use his wrestling to keep this fight standing, and I want to see him use his boxing skills to shine in this fight. And it may play out closely, but I think that he can get the job done in this matchup. And he is a dog, like I said. So literally, not literally, I mean, he's not an actual dog that's barking, but you know what I'm saying? He's a dog when he's in the cage with his fighting spirit, and he's also an underdog in this fight. Right now, he's right on a plus 185 dog. I think that's clearly where the value is. We may see Vieira go out there and shine. I mean, he's really shown to pick the MMA game up, right? I mean, we saw him come in as just a BJJ specialist years ago, and he's really picking up the MMA side of things. He's a well-rounded fighter. He has his own fighting spirit, but I still like the dog value on Petroski, and I think that it's not out of the realm that he gets a finish late in this fight, but if it goes to the judges' scorecards, I could also see him getting his hand raised. I really like what the UFC did here, matching up Edmen Shahbazyan with Dylan Budka, and it's no disrespect towards Budka's way, but he's a massive step down in competition compared to who Shahbazyan has been in there with recently and throughout the years. And Shahbazyan is just 27 years old. He's still a young fighter. He kicked off his UFC career very young. He always goes out there and looks to put on a show for us. He's always searching for a finish. And sometimes when he's looking for that finish, it ends up biting him, right? You take a look at that last fight against Gerald Meerschaert. You could argue that he could have easily coasted to a unanimous decision. But with that aggressive type of style, eventually he gets caught in a sub. And I'm sure that frustrated a lot of you guys that had him involved in a 2-teamer or a 3-teamer or something like that in a parlay. But I mean, take a look. I mean, he knocked out AJ Dobson before that. Then he gets knocked out by Hernandez. Before that, he knocks out Dalche Lingambula. Before that, he's knocked out by Imavov. I mean, there's just, the fight's going one way or another. He's either getting that finish or you're finishing him. Besides the Hermanson decision loss, I mean, that's all we're seeing from him in there. And it's been like that since he kicked his UFC career off, for which I believe he was like 22 at the time they threw him in there with Darren Stewart. A lot of people may kind of chuckle at Darren Stewart, but I mean, he was a tough dude, right? The dentist. I mean, he had heavy hands. He had underrated takedown defense. And it's just good to see the UFC giving Shahbazyan a fight like this. He should get a couple more of these. Let him cruise into his 30s on a nice winning streak, as maybe he can make a run in this division. Okay, I don't know. I mean, I don't ever see him being a fighter that holds the gold because tactically he just makes too many errors. I don't think he has the fight IQ to do it, but he's very talented. We know he came in to the MMA world with a very polished jiu-jitsu resume. His striking's nasty. He's very fluid and technical there. Now, when it comes to Budka, I'll give him a little bit of credit. In that last fight against Andre Petroski, who we were just talking about, he showed to be a little bit more game than I thought that he was. Okay, he put up a fight at times, and if you mess around with a fighter like Budka, I could see him clipping you with something or doing something to hurt you in there. The way he fights, even though you don't really see it on his resume that much, you don't see a bunch of knockouts. I mean, we saw him in that fight with Petroski, and we saw his boxing and striking looked somewhat dangerous. And I just throw that out there because if Shahbazyan thinks this is going to be just a walk in the park and he's going out there and he's just going to slice through him like butter and he's a hot knife, this is still the fight game, and Budka can maybe clip him with something. Okay, I want to throw that out there. There is that type of possibility, but all in all, I just think that Shahbazyan's just on a whole nother level. If he fights a smart fight, he should be able to find a finish in this fight, not only get his hand raised, but he should be able to find that finish, and I will say that he does that. I'm going to say that he gets a knockout, maybe like a TKO type of situation where he puts Budka into a vulnerable situation down on the mat and rains down shots, and the ref kind of has to step in. Budka's very tough. I mean, he won't look for a way out, but he just may be outmatched here. That's the way I see this fight going. So Shahbazyan is currently a minus 270 favorite, and I could see him creeping up to like a minus 330, 340. I expect to see continuous action come in on him throughout the fight week. Dylan Budka is he's a fighter that people kind of look down at. And, he'll be fighting with a heavy heart. I mean, his back will be up against the wall. His UFC career may be on the line here, even though he's just 25. I mean, this may be it for the kid here. I mean, he's not getting his hand raised in these big fights, so this is big for him. A little earlier in the video, we mentioned Elijah Smith being one of the more exciting signees of this past season of Dana White's Contender Series. Well, I'll let you know, you could definitely throw Jose Delgado's name in the mix as well. Jose Delgado looked stellar in that fight against Ernie Smith, where he hit him with the flying knee to the noggin, finished him up there. I mean, he was so fluid and comfortable on the feet as he handed Ernie Juarez his first ever L. Connor Matthews is a fighter that comes in through the DWCS scene, and he's had some ups and downs, right? He lost his first fight on the show, eventually did bounce back with the victory against Jair Faris as he went to a unanimous decision, but he then followed that up with a UFC debut loss against Dennis Bazooka, and I think that he's going to be in for some trouble here. Now, Matthews has a little bit more of a meat and potato type of fighting style. As you guys know, once in a while I like to compare fighters to a nice plate, as I'm getting a little hungry right now. But when I'm saying meat and potatoes, I mean, that's a stellar meal, but I'm talking about, some stew meat and potatoes. I'm not talking about a nice ribeye. Okay, he has a very bland type of style. Now, he does pull off submissions in the cage when he's getting his hand raised. I mean, that's typically what's going on. 5 subs out of his 7 victories, but I'm not crazy about the level of fighter that he's been pulling that off against. And my gut's telling me that the offensive threat that Delgado is going to bring here is going to really have Matthews hesitating with his entries. And I just see Delgado landing something very impactful and very hurtful on Matthews before we see Matthews being able to get this fight down to the mat. And even if Delgado is taken down, we're seeing some development with him there. I think that he can work his way back up to his feet, where he then will be switching stances and landing big strikes. And if Matthews looks to force those takedowns, I could even see a flying knee being landed once again, as we saw in his last fight. And it's just the offensive threat of Delgado is so well-versed. It's so dynamic. You're going to see those elbows, knees, kicks, and all types of strikes coming Matthews' way. And I like what I've seen from the MMA Lab product here, and I think that he's going to shine in his UFC debut fight. I think that not only will he get his hand raised, I think he could find a finish here. You take a look at Matthews' 2 losses. One of them did come by way of knockout, which we talked about, the Bazooka KO, which was his UFC debut, and that was a fight that he was very hesitant in. The more you saw those 2 fighters trading and going at it, you saw that Matthews can be vulnerable. And it's not that I'm necessarily down on Bazooka, but I actually believe that Delgado is a more dangerous striker. I mean, he has a lot more to prove, but I think that he'll prove eventually to be the more dangerous and more successful UFC fighter. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that already now. Now, I don't have a betting line for this fight. This is the only fight I don't have odds on. They haven't released them yet as I'm recording this, but it makes it kind of exciting. I like when this happens once in a while. I'm going to say that Delgado is going to be around a minus 250 to minus 350 favorite. He's going to be a steep favorite here. I could be wrong. Maybe people feel that the wrestling attack that Matthews could try to use here could play a factor. Maybe we see this line closer, but I expect Delgado to be a pretty big favorite. And the UFC is giving him an opportunity like this for a reason. Okay, the UFC is backing him. Okay, they're getting good intel from him coming out of the MMA Lab, and he's a fight finisher. He looks to put on a show. There's a reason why he's getting this matchup and this opportunity on the main card. So this fight right here on paper is my most anticipated fight of the card. I love this matchup, and I already know this fight's going to deliver. You have Ismael Bonfim, the older of the Bonfim brothers, taking on Nazim Sadykhov, a fighter that has really proven to deliver for the fans since kicking off his UFC career. Now, Ismael Bonfim, comment below and tell me if you guys agree with me. For some reason, I get this Patricio Pitbull vibes from him. And I know there's probably a couple of reasons why that comes to mind. Of course, he is a part of a brother duo in the MMA world, right? You got Ismael and Gabriel Bonfim, while on the other hand, you have Patricio Pitbull, which I know you guys are familiar with them. I'm not even going to disrespect you guys and say if you're not familiar, but also note, Patricio is now a free agent and he wants to sign with the UFC. I would say he is the most successful and the most accomplished Bellator fighter that we've ever seen. I really want to see him in the octagon. I know It's towards the tail end of his career. But listen, it's towards the tail end of Volkanovski's career too. Alexander Volkanovski, I would love to see that fight there. Okay, that's a fight years ago we would have all loved to have seen, right, as they both fight in the featherweight division. And just to also follow up on that, he is part of that brother duo, as his brother Petroski, Pitbull, just signed with the GFL, right? So Petroski not really on the level of Patricio, but two high-level fighters. And they kind of have the look, similar weight classes. I know this is a lightweight fight. Ismael's a lightweight fighter, but similar, right? Lightweight, featherweight, and they just have that look. They have similar fighting styles. They go out there and they look to finish you. They're well-rounded, and I'm very interested to see how far Ismael is going to push it, right? And I'll just mention his brother too. I'm very interested to see how far him and Gabriel are going to push it and how far they make a run in the octagon. They deliver for the fans every time they're in there. He already has 24 professional fights at just the age of 29. He has a lot of experience, so he's comfortable in the heat of a fight. If things get crazy in there, like I expect them to be, Ismael will be comfortable in there. I also believe that Nazim will be very comfortable in there, as we just saw him in an absolute war against Slava Borishev. But, the fact that fight went to a draw, it was kind of a loss for him. All right. He had that 10-8 round in the second round. It looked like he was clearly going to get his hand raised as he was taking over the fight. And then he takes a step back in the third round. And that was a little alarming to me. Okay. I know Slava's a very tough fighter, but that was alarming to me. Typically, when you see a fighter dominate a round in the second round like that, they should either find the finish in the third or dominate the third once again, or at the very least win the round 10-9. And that was alarming to me. Also, when you take a look at the Evan Elder fight, which was his UFC debut fight coming in from DWCS, I know that fight very well. I had an official play on him. I was very happy to cash it. It was a close fight, but he was kind of en route to losing that fight. Okay, he was the fighter that was slowing down. We saw Evan Elder picking up the pace on him, and the only reason why Sadykhov won that fight was due to the fact that they stopped the dude to the cut, so he got a TKO finish. So he probably was en route to losing that fight. He did follow that up with an impressive submission victory over Terrence McKinney, where he weathered the storm, showed the grappling abilities that he has. He fights out of the southpaw stance. He has underrated power. He could strike. He has grappling. The grappling could be a factor in this fight, because when you take a look at Ismael's recent loss to Benoit Saint-Denis, that was a fight where there was a quick pace to it, right? Things started off heavy, and eventually we saw BSD break him down and pull off the rear naked choke. And that's something that we saw Sadykhov do to Terrence McKinney. So I'm curious to see if we could see Sadykhov have some success there with his wrestling. After that loss, though, you do have to admire the way that Ismael bounced back with the victory over Vince Pichel, which it did go to a decision, but he basically outclassed him in that fight. He won a unanimous decision. He outstruck him handedly, and he should come back into this fight with his confidence soaring, as that loss that he took is starting to fade away in the rear view mirror, and he's starting to get really comfortable in the octagon. So I'll tell you what, we're going to get to the odds here in a second. I think that this is a fight that could definitely play out closely. As we see that high pace to it, anything could happen in there. We could see a knockout. We could see somebody get hurt in a fight like this. But when it's all said and done, I really like the way that Bonfim works the body. I think he has a little bit more of a fighting spirit. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't know if I would say fighting spirit, because Sadykhov is very tough as well. But I think that Bonfim is the fighter that could push through adversity more so in a war. All right. Highlighting once again the way Sadykhov dropped that third round against Slava. I did not like that. And I also really like the way Bonfim works the body. I think that those body shots that he lands with his boxing will pay dividends as this fight goes to the later rounds. And I'm going to say that Bonfim gets Sadykhov out of there. Just with the pace that we're going to have going on in this fight. I know both of these guys are very tough, and they may look to push through adversity. We've seen Bonfim sub twice before. He's never been knocked out. We've seen Sadykhov sub once before. We've never seen him knocked out. So we've never seen either fighter KO'd. But I actually feel we could see a TKO type stoppage come either way. But I'm going to say it's Bonfim that lands that type of finish. And you take a look at their wins, okay? Sadykhov has 9 wins. 6 of them have come by way of KO. 67% of them have come by way of KO. Ismael's 20 victories, 50% of them have come by way of KO. And then you also have 4 undocumented victories that took place early on in the Brazilian regional scene. Those probably were KOs too. And both these fighters are knockout artists. And I think that we could see a knockout come in this fight. And I think it's going to be Bonfim that gets it. Even if it goes to the judges' scorecards, I favor Bonfim to push through that adversity a little bit more so. I like him in this spot. He's a minus 150. I think that that's another accurate line. I don't want to go over the top with saying there's a lot of value on that line because I just want to respect Sadykhov here. He's dangerous. This is going to be a war. And you got to keep an eye on the potential wrestling attack that Sadykhov may look to impose. He may string off some takedowns. And if he fights a more cerebral and tactical type of style, and we see the pace slow down a little bit, that could favor Sadykhov. So I'm not going to go crazy here and say, yeah, the value is all over Ismael Bonfim, but I do like him. I do like him at minus 150. It's an accurate line, but I'd rather be on his side even at the minus 150 line, and I say he gets the finish. Hey, you guys, real quick, I just want to give a special thank you to you for tuning into the show. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to sit here on the mic doing what I love to do, which is breaking down these fights. And thank you so much for that. If you guys can, just hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and go follow me on my social media. I'm on Instagram at MMA Fortune Teller. Go follow me like Dricus Duplessis is. I got big names in the game following me these days. I got that blue verification. Go catch me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at the MMA Teller. And also, if you don't have social media and you want to reach out to me, you can email me at MMAFortuneTeller@gmail.com. All right, back to the show. To the co-main event in the featherweight division, we have Youssef Zalal taking on Cavalcanti. Both these fighters at very contrasting points of their careers. Kattar, in my opinion, is probably on the verge of retirement. I mean, at the very least, he's creeping up to it. Even if he bounces back with the victory here, I mean, he's creeping up on 37 years old. How much longer can you really keep doing it inside the octagon at a high level? Because the UFC is always going to give him those high-level matchups regardless because of the work that he's put in throughout the years. On the other hand, Youssef Zalal, this situation, right, his storyline, you could use this to really motivate yourself in a variety of ways in life, okay? How drastically things can change if you keep your head, on the straight and narrow. Because think about this, right? He's a fighter that gets cut by the UFC. Some people in his shoes could have really been down on themselves and they could have made some bad choices that could have led them to have never been in the situation that he's in now, where he's in a big co-main event spot and he comes in on a 6-fight winning streak, right? Take a look at what he went through, right? He went through some adversity where he did go to a draw with Damon Blackshear, but before that, he took 3 L's in a row. Okay, so he didn't get his hand raised for 4 fights. He gets cut by the UFC. I don't know exactly how he handled it, but I'm assuming that he handled it well and he understood the situation. He has good people around him as he's over there at Factory X. He knew that all he needed to do was go to the drawing board. He started taking kickboxing matches and some MMA matches over at a promotion called Sparta. He had a lot of success. Was getting his hand raised multiple times. He was finishing dudes over there. He was getting that experience under his belt. And then he comes back to the UFC. And, I'm just going to say, if you guys remember, I picked him to win that fight against Billy Q. Not a lot of people had him against Billy Q. I had a feeling that he was going to come in to that spot and look much more developed when you just take a look at the age that he was at around that time. And he followed that Billy Q victory up with 2 more as he is now on. He's coming into this fight on 3 submission victories in a row. And the last one was very impressive, submitting Jack Shore, who's talented there as well. So, I mean, he's a well-rounded fighter. He could outstrike you. He could take you down. He could do a little bit of it all. And Cavalcanti's coming into this fight with some real question marks as he's getting up there in age. And he was just ragdolled by Aljamain Sterling. I'm not necessarily sure that Zalal is going to be able to replicate what Sterling did there because Sterling is really good at doing that. He has very high-level wrestling and grappling. And I do believe Zalal is high-level there, but Sterling's much more proved, so we'll see how that plays out. But it is possible. It is possible that he will rinse and repeat those takedowns and have a lot of success down the mat. But even on the feet, we could see Zalal be tactical and possibly outpoint Kattar, okay? But he has to be careful there because Kattar's boxing skills are very high level. If he could implement anything that he's done in the past, if he could show a little bit of what he used to be, this fight could be competitive, and he could also be a threat to get a finish. I mean, when you take a look back at some of Kattar's best performances, the 10 knockouts out of his 23 victories, he is a fight finisher. I just have a hard time seeing the fight play out like that. I think that we're going to see Kattar disappoint once again. No matter how the fight plays out, I think that he disappoints once again, and we're talking about him being cut from the UFC potentially. I mean, it's hard to say that he gets cut, right? Because he's a ranked fighter, but when you understand that he just keeps losing and he's up there in age, the UFC may cut ties with him. We head over to the betting odds, and you'll see that Vegas is in agreement with what I've been saying. Zalal's coming into this fight right around a minus 425 favorite, right around that minus 400 to minus 425 range. Okay, he's a 4-1 favorite here. That's saying a lot. That shows you how quickly the fight game can change, because if this fight was taking place just a few years ago, Kattar would have been probably a minus 400 favorite, right? So it's kind of funny when you look at it like that. And that line is, I don't know if it's exactly warranted. It's a little steep for my liking. I kind of have Kattar probably capped more around like a minus 350 favorite, because if he doesn't have that success with the grappling, it could play out closely on the feet. And Kattar is coming into this fight extremely motivated. Zalal still should be the big favorite, but you're getting a little crazy there as you're creeping up to the minus 425 range. And you may be talking about that value being on the dog if you're catching Kattar at a plus 335. And then we head over to the main event, where we have another veteran with his back up against the wall. The number 7th ranked middleweight fighter, Jared Cannonier, takes on Gregory Rodrigues. Rodrigues is hungry to get a number next to his name. If I were to tell you one of these men was 40 years old and you didn't know who they were, right? You didn't know nothing about them, being fighters or whatnot. You're just looking at their physiques, their face. I'm willing to bet that the majority of people who would pick Gregory Rodrigues being the 40-year-old fighter or the 40-year-old man, just based on the way his face looks. You guys know he does suffer from Obama syndrome. But Jared Cannonier, man, this dude still comes in phenomenal shape. It's crazy to think back when he was fighting up in the heavyweight division, the light heavyweight division. He carried all that excess weight, and just how phenomenal he's looked physically and with his fighting in the cage throughout the years. And he's still fighting at a high level, especially for a 40-year-old fighter, right? He did drop the Khaos fight, although Khaos outlanded him 156-83, and he won that fight on one of the two of the judges' scorecards, 49-45. Even had a 10-8 round. I don't think that necessarily describes how that fight went. If you guys remember it, that was a very fun fight. It was competitive, and Cannonier had some moments where he was hurting Khaos. Before that, he was finished up against Imavov, and I want to be clear. Some people will say, "Oh, it was an early stoppage or whatnot." No, you have to understand that Cannonier was slowing down. He was breaking down in that fight, and Imavov was going to get that finish regardless of how you looked at that stoppage. And Imavov is a high-level fighter. As you guys know, I picked him to take out Stylebender, and I think that he has some serious potential moving forward, as he's still very young, and it's very likely he gets his hand on the gold eventually. Okay, so that's a high-level fighter there. But there were some signs of Cannonier looking older in that fight. We see him get hurt, right? We see him do the chicken dance often as of recently. That's something that I definitely noticed. And in a matchup like this, where Gregory Rodrigues is very aggressive and has big-time power, I do believe it's very likely that Rodrigues can get Cannonier out via strikes. But with that being said, I'm going to tell you this. I think it's also very likely that Cannonier can knock Rodrigues out. You take a look at Rodrigues' 5 losses, 3 of them come by way of KO. Of course, when we all got to know him on Dana White's Contender Series, he came into a fight against Jordan Williams, right? The undersized diabetic, really a welterweight fighter. He's not able to cut weight. Rodrigues was a massive favorite, and he got clipped with the big shot as he was overly aggressive. We saw that replicated against Bruno Ferreira, was knocked out against Bruno as of recently. And then if you also want to take a look back in the day, he was also knocked out against Bruno Lopez, a fighter that we're familiar with. That took place over in Jungle Fight. Bruno Lopez has fought in the UFC, came in through the Dana White's Contender Series. But the point I'm making is we see Rodrigues get hurt on the feet. So do not be surprised if you see a fighter with the power of Cannonier and the technical abilities there and the fighting spirit. Don't be surprised if he gets a KO on Rodrigues in a fight that may play out in a very aggressive type of style. This is a fight that I expect to see it be a war. I mean, when Rodrigues is in there, that's what's going to happen. Okay, he's not going to allow you to be in a boring fight with him. And Cannonier is kind of the same fighter. Okay, but it's more so Rodrigues that's going to force the fight to be that type of fight. And when you have that type of situation, I think one of these men are going to land a KO. I like the unders in this fight. I do not like this fight to go to the final bell, but I favor it being Rodrigues that gets the KO in this fight. And if we see different type of tactics going on in the fight, I would lean towards Rodrigues being the fighter that's more well-rounded with his youth. His wrestling and his grappling skills have looked pretty damn high level as of recently. And if Cannonier starts to breathe heavy and slow down, I wouldn't be surprised if Rodrigues takes him down, even though Cannonier overall has showcased to have good takedown defense. But you get older, those reflexes and those type of abilities will slow down as well. It's not just your chin that goes. And I think Rodrigues could potentially take him down. Maybe he sets up a sub. Rodrigues is a high-level fighter. Okay, he surrounds himself with some high-level talent, trains over there at Team Killcliff FC, has a striking coach like Henry Hooft. Actually, just an MMA coach, right? Henry Hooft is just a straight-up MMA coach these days. But Rodrigues surrounds himself with a lot of high-level people, and you see it translating into his game, and he's just entering his prime. Let's take a look at the odds for this fight. Right now, we're seeing Rodrigues around a -190 to as high as a -210 favorite. Okay, so he's a 2-to-1 favorite. To me, I don't see a lot of value on that line because I think it's just risky in a match like this where we could see either man knocked out. And Cannonier is really not a fighter to be overlooked. And although he's 40, we've seen him in the cage recently still fighting on a high level. So I don't like really chalking up 2-to-1 odds on Rodrigues. If that line comes down to like -165, something like that, then we could start talking. But the values on the dog here on Cannonier, which you can get as high as like +160, that's where the value is. But I will say that Rodrigues is the fighter that ends up finding that finish more so than Cannonier. But we will see a finish in that fight. All right, guys, that's going to wrap this one up. I highly appreciate you for hanging with me throughout this entire video. And I hope this video was insightful and helps you guys out. If it was, smash that like button. If you're new, please subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to me, guys. And I'll give you guys some quick parting words. It's starting to warm up a little bit. I'm sure there's some more cold fronts that are coming our way before winter ends. But as it starts to warm up, make sure you guys are getting out there, letting that sun beat on your skin and you're feeling good. Make sure you're eating healthy and you're being the best version of yourself. Start taking care of yourself more so, work out, and get out there, take your shirt off and feel good about yourself. All right, I'll leave you guys with that. Signing out. Teller.
The teller. The teller. The teller.